What's up, guys? I hope you're well. Today we're checking out the key to Red Bull speed that F1 rivals missed. Let's get into it, shall we?
What makes the Red Bull RB19 so dominant? Aerodynamics, right? Well, yes and no. It's no secret that the Red Bull produces a huge amount of downforce and remains aero efficient given its great straight line speed both with and without DRS. But something else is key to the grip level it produces. Not convinced? Well, last year, in an interview with The Race's Mark Hughes, Red Bull design legend Adrian Newey made the surprising revelation that his focus was the front and rear suspension. That's a hint as to one key aspect that has made both last year's and this year's Red Bull so strong. And building on last year's mechanical platform has helped Red Bull to make a bigger performance step this year than rivals thought possible. But although the focus here is on Red Bull's suspension design, this isn't about mechanical grip levels. Everything in an F1 car is connected when it comes to performance. There is no magic bullet. But the fact that Newey, arguably F1's greatest design genius of the past 30 plus years, recognised the significance of the suspension design points to a key aspect of Red Bull's advantage that rivals have missed. There's been much talk about Red Bull hitting on the optimum car concept for these regulations. That's the familiar shape with the downwash ramps in the side pods, which most teams on the grid have to a greater or lesser extent followed, Mercedes and Ferrari being the notable exceptions. That's why Ferrari has conceded its concept has a lower ceiling than that of the Red Bull, and Mercedes admitted at the start of the season that it needed to change direction with its car design. In both cases, they thought their different approaches could be developed enough to become Red Bull beaters, but they underestimated the performance potential of the Red Bull. Then we come to Aston Martin. Its car has been, somewhat unfairly, characterised as effectively a copy of the 2022 Red Bull by Red Bull. But it isn't. As we covered in depth in another video, the Aston Martin is not a straight copy. Yes, it has those downwash side pods, similarities in floor philosophy and presumably in its underfloor design, but there is one fundamental difference, and that's in the suspension. When Red Bull launched last year, it flipped the script on suspension geometry. Instead of pushrod configuration at the front, Newey's design was pullrod, and at the rear, instead of pullrod, it was pushrod. That's carried over into this year. Meanwhile, Aston Martin has the opposite, with pushrod at the front and the Mercedes pullrod configuration at the rear thanks to its technical partnership with the Silver Arrows. Now, this isn't just about how you actuate the rocker in the suspension, pull or push, hence the names pullrod and pushrod, but the whole geometry. There are other, very significant differences to be noted. What Red Bull has been able to do is employ extreme anti-dive and anti-squat configurations to give it a key aerodynamic advantage by holding its mechanical platform in a precise window.
Nice.
That's why even Aston Martin, with a car that's very similar in concept to the Red Bull, is still at a pace disadvantage. Anti-squat and anti-dive in themselves are nothing remotely new. They are well understood geometries, and the benefit of such platform control is well known to anyone with even a passing familiarity with car suspension systems. Every F1 team aims to control the platform as precisely as possible. This is because the more consistent the attitude of the car, the better it is for the aerodynamic performance. That's why active suspension was so effective before it was banned at the end of 1993. It's also why complex hydraulic systems later proliferated in F1 as teams found other ways to control the platform for aero gain. But the regulations have gradually cracked down on this. For 2022, the suspension regulations were simplified both in terms of the permitted configurations and also the use of hydraulic actuation and inerters. This meant a greater emphasis on good old-fashioned mechanical control of the suspension. Now, Red Bull had good control of the mechanical platform last year and ran with extreme anti-dive front suspension. This anti-dive on the front is achieved by having the front arm of the upper wishbone mounted higher at the chassis inboard mounting points. The rear arm of the upper wishbone is mounted lower. The angle between the two wishbone arms dictates the level of anti-dive. The more, the better. Effectively, this provides greater resistance when the weight shifts forward under braking. That's been retained this year. But where there has been a significant change is in the rear suspension. Last year, the rear leg of the top wishbone of the Red Bull rear suspension was mounted to the top of the gearbox. But for 2023, this was moved to be mounted on an additional structure that sits on top of the gearbox. We can't see the mounting point, but you can see a clear difference in the height of the rear leg where it attaches to the car inboard. This gives it more effective anti-squat geometry. The anti-squat is achieved by effectively having the reverse of the anti-dive on the front. The rearmost arm of the wishbone is mounted higher, the forward one lower. This works to hold the rear end in a narrower window rather than compressing as the load builds. While anti-squat can slightly reduce the traction of the rear wheels, the overall aero gain it allows Red Bull to unlock outweighs that. The upshot is a car that is held in a narrow window mechanically, which is also helped by the anti-lift characteristics of the rear suspension. If you run the car lower, that means you work the ground effect underfloor harder and generate more downforce. And this is an exponential effect because when you get the Venturi throat close to the ground, you get a significant reduction in the pressure. Just look at how much the Red Bull sparks compared to its rivals to see how low it's running. Others, by comparison, running that low would start hitting the ground and get into porpoising troubles.
Yep.
Red Bull's anti-squat prevents it from falling into the same trap. This configuration also has the advantage of helping the effectiveness of the DRS. As we explained in a previous video, the Red Bull has something of a triple DRS effect. It already has an aero-efficient car, but the DRS activation also stalls the beam wing and reduces a little of the drag from the floor. The trick isn't just the visible geometry, but having the suspension internals working to ensure you can control it. As we saw last season, it's easy to trigger porpoising when running a car close to the ground, so Red Bull not only understands how to design an extreme geometry, but more importantly, make it work. One disadvantage that the Red Bull has because of this is that cars running plenty of anti-dive don't work the front tyres so hard. That means it's difficult to build tyre temperature for a qualifying lap. This explains why Red Bull's advantage is just under a couple of tenths in qualifying on average, but around the 7 to 8 tenths mark in race trim. Once the front tyre temperature is built and in steady state running, the front grip is there.
Nice.
We also had another clue of a negative effect in Melbourne. There, Sergio Perez had trouble locking the front brakes, and even Max Verstappen locked up and briefly went off on his way to victory in the race.
Wow.
Why? Because anti-dive front suspension reduces brake pedal feel and sensitivity. As always, nothing comes for free in F1.
True.
So are there any places where this weakness could knock Red Bull off its perch? Well, it's more vulnerable in qualifying, but at most circuits should still have the edge. However, the Monaco Grand Prix could be a challenge, given there are plenty of slower corners where you need strong front grip, and there's a dramatically reduced DRS effect because there's simply not many places you can open it. So it will be difficult to get the front tyres into a good window, especially on such a short, low-speed track. This doesn't mean Red Bull won't be in contention in Monaco, simply that it could offer an opportunity for Ferrari, Mercedes or Aston Martin to outqualify the Red Bulls and control the race, even if the Red Bull is faster in the Grand Prix. But when you design a car, it's to be strongest across the broadest range of circuits, and that's what Red Bull has. And given it requires major changes to introduce such suspension geometry, it's unlikely other teams will be able to do that in season under the cost cap. So we can expect others to follow in this direction next year.
Yep.
The question is, what will Red Bull come up with that's new to take another step in 2024 while others are catching up?
So, it's not the driver, it's the vehicle. Aha, put Max Verstappen in a Williams, see what he would do with that vehicle, right? Just messing. Very informative, very cool. I enjoyed that. I hope you guys did as well. With that being said, I want to thank you all for watching. Stay safe, and don't forget to wash your hands. Bye.